Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today, we are honored to have Dr. Vinita Chouhan and Julie Burt presenting Advancing the Adverse Outcome Pathway Approach in Radiation Research through Global Coordination. My name is Cassandra Carlson, and I will be hosting the webinar on the back end. This webinar is approximately 45 minutes, followed by a Q&A session. Please enter any questions you may have in the Q&A box, and we will address them at the end. Moderating for us today is Dr. Edward Azzam and Dr. Kimberly Applegate. Dr. Edward Azzam is a research scientist in the radiobiology and health branch of the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. He is also Professor Emeritus at Rutgers University, New Jersey Medical School. Edward is a long-term member of the Radiation Research Society. He received his doctoral degree in the field of radiation biology from the University of Ottawa and pursued postdoctoral studies at the Harvard School of Public Health under the mentorship of Professor John B. Little. His research program has focused on elucidating the mechanisms underlying the biological effects of low doses, low fluences of ionizing radiations that differ in biophysical characteristics. He has also participated in the training of numerous students and postdoctoral fellows who remain engaged in unraveling the biochemical events underlying the responses of mammalian cells to occupational and therapeutic doses of radiation. Our second moderator today is Dr. Kimberly Applegate. Dr. Applegate is the chair of Committee 3 of ICRP since 2017, focusing on radiation protection in medicine and an elected member of the NCRP. Dr. Applegate is a retired professor of radiology and pediatrics from the University of Kentucky in Lexington. Dr. Applegate's policy and research work, including 200 publications, has resulted in an improved understanding of the structure, process, and outcomes of how imaging is practiced, including the volume of variation of practice and its improvement and standardization. She has worked collaboratively around the world across medical specialties and geographic boundaries to improve access to best practices. From its start in 2007 to the present, she has worked on the steering committee for the Image Gently Alliance to improve children's care worldwide. Kimberly has received a number of awards that include the 2019 AAPM's honorary membership and the American Association for Women in Radiology's Marie Curie Award for her unique roles in leadership and outstanding contributions to the advancement of women in the radiology professions. She and her husband, George Parker, have 3 grown sons, David, and twins, Andrew and Eric. And I'll hand it over to Dr. Azzam and Dr. Applegate to introduce Dr. Vinita Chouhan and Julie Burt.
Thank you, Cassandra, and greetings to everyone from around the world. It is really my distinct privilege today to introduce Vinita Chouhan, who has been doing admirable contributions to the field of adverse outcome pathways. Dr. Chouhan is a research scientist with the Consumer and Clinical Radiation Protection Bureau at Health Canada. She received her PhD in biochemistry from the University of Ottawa. Her recent research focus includes understanding the health effects of low-dose radiation exposures that are relevant to the public. She is the co-founder of the Canadian Organization of Health Effects from Radiation Exposure Initiative, which is a new Canadian research program that is a collaboration between Health Canada and the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, where Julie Burt, our second presenter, works. Vinita is the Canadian delegate on the Nuclear Energy Agency's high-level group on low-dose research and the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development Extended Advisory Group on Molecular Screening and Toxicogenomics. More recently, she was appointed to chair the RADChem AOP Joint Topical Group, which is proposed to help advance radiological and chemical research using the Adverse Outcome Pathway platform. She is also heavily involved in bringing awareness on the important topic of Indigenous knowledge systems in science considerations through the Health Canada Science Integration Network.
I'm delighted to introduce her. She is a radiation biologist with 15 years experience with the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, and her primary research interests are focused on effects of low-dose ionizing radiation and its potential health consequences following hypothetical nuclear accidents. She's also a member of the Canadian Organization of Health Effects from Radiation Exposure, the COHER initiative, and also involved with the National Energy Agency's RAD-CHEM AOP Joint Topical Group, which we're actually all involved in. She has represented Canada as an advisor to the UN Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation, UNSCEAR, and the ICRP, as well as the NEA Expert Group on the non-radiological health impacts following a nuclear accident. In her spare time, Julie Burt is working towards her PhD in human studies and interdisciplinarity, looking at the perceived risk of radiation specific to new and emerging nuclear technologies. So we look forward to her talk after Vinita. So I'll hand it to Vinita now.
So hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to begin by thanking Dr. Azam for the wonderful, kind introductions, and also for this opportunity to present. As well, I'd like to thank Cassandra and her team for organizing this session, and the moderators for facilitating the discussions. And of course, you, the participants, for taking the time today to listen in. So today, I'm very happy to provide you an overview on the adverse outcome pathway approach, with the emphasis here on the word of global coordination, which I will discuss shortly. So before I begin, I just want to highlight that I've been part of the Organization of Economic Cooperation Development's AOP program for the past 2 years, and I've learned a lot, and I would really like to take this opportunity to share that knowledge and experience. So having said that, the objective of the webinar today is to introduce you to the Adverse Outcome Pathway Framework, what it is, how it can support your research, and why you should use them. As well, how you can get involved in advancing the approach. So in this context, I'll briefly introduce the RAD-CHEM AOP Joint Topical Group, and as well, one of the initiatives being conducted through this group, the Horizon Style Exercise, which my wonderful colleague, Ms. Julie Burt, will discuss shortly. So before we begin, let's talk a little bit about the motivation for using adverse outcome pathways, specifically the radiation challenge. So historically, if we look at our radiation protection framework, it's been built on models, specifically the linear no threshold model, which is predominantly derived from human exposure to acute high doses and dose rates, where the emphasis has been directed to cancer effects. This has helped manage risk, but with considerable uncertainty at the low doses. And this is where it's believed that mechanistic data may be helpful to support or reduce this uncertainty. As well, separately, in the last decade, the chemical field is also faced with a similar challenge. So with the increased number of chemicals that are coming out in the market, there's a need to expedite chemical toxicity testing and also reduce animal testing in a cost-effective manner, possibly using mechanistically based data. So this is where the adverse outcome pathway is identified to be instrumental for supporting both regulatory sciences and research. So to add another layer of complexity, it's not as if we don't have the mechanistic data, because we have across scientific disciplines accumulated a considerable amount of biological research at the molecular, cellular, tissue, and population level. However, as we work in silos, this data represents fragments of information that have ineffectively been used to support risk assessment. So how do we bring this data together to better support regulatory decision-making? So where do we start? Across scientific fields, there is of course this driving need to understand the underlying biology of disease. This is a critical driver for developing risk assessment strategies and offers opportunities for collaboration. So a first step towards this is a better representation of our existing science into a format that facilitates the building of a comprehensive knowledge base for biological effects. So this could be achieved through reorganization of data, which can link micro-level events to macro-level outcomes. And this is where the adverse outcome pathway approach would be of benefit. So AOPs are a conceptual framework with predictive utility that draw from prior knowledge. They collect studies from all levels of biological organization, molecular to the population level, using all types of studies. So in silico, epi studies, and the whole premise is to support regulatory risk assessment. So there's clear guidelines in building an AOP. If you want detailed instructions, I'd encourage you to visit the OECD website. And here what I'll do is just briefly provide a high-level overview. So they begin with what is known as a molecular initiating event, shown here in red. So this is defined as that first chemical physical interaction with the body. These then lead to key events that are measurable, biologically dominant, and essential to achieve some sort of adverse outcome of interest. And they're causally connected by key event relationships. And these are supported by empirical evidence that comes in the form of the Bradford Hill consideration. So what we're looking at are the structural functional relationships between two key events. Are they essential? Are they well defined? Is there a lot of evidence to support them in the form of dose, time, and incidence concordance? And also we're looking at what are the uncertainties and inconsistencies in these relationships. So this really is the meat or the heart of an AOP, these relationships. The AOPs are simplistic, but yet there's a lot of depth of knowledge within the key event relationships. And the whole process then ends with an adverse outcome of interest or that phenotypic change. So here I provide an example of an AOP that we recently developed to lung cancer, which is relevant to stressors such as radon gas. So following a preliminary screening of the literature in the field of radiation-induced lung cancer, it was identified that there is considerable or decades of research being done in DNA damage and repair. So a subset of this data was compiled and captured in an AOP in the most simplified path using the MIE of deposition of energy onto the DNA. So I say a subset because as a complete collation of the data would require a lot of resources than what we had at the time. So the components for this AOP begin with deposition of energy, as I mentioned, as the MIE. The figure also illustrates both the adjacent and the non-adjacent KEs and KERs that comprise the AOP. So what we're looking at here is energy deposited onto a cell can lead to multiple ionization events to targets, such as DNA. This energy can damage DNA, leading to double-strand breaks, which is defined as key event 1. This will then initiate repair activation, key event 2, in higher eukaryotes through mechanisms that are quick and efficient, but error-prone. If double-strand breaks occur in regions of DNA transcribing critical genes, then mutations generated through faulty repair may alter the function of these genes or cause chromosomal aberrations. This can then impact cellular pathways, such as cell growth, cell cycling, and then lead to cell proliferation, which is key event 5. And this will then inform hyperplasia in the cells, leading to our adverse outcome of interest, which is lung cancer. So it's clear that our proposed AOP is not the only route to the adverse outcome. It can, of course, be expanded by other researchers. And this is absolutely the strength of AOPs, is that the collaborative building of AOPs allows you to form networks, which better represents the biology. As well, the front end of the AOP was a focus as opposed to the latter half, which is well understood as hallmarks of cancer. So in building AOPs in this manner, it really does allow us for a pragmatic simplification of the biology, identifying what is essential and biologically dominant. It also identifies the relevant experimental evidence using an easy accessible framework. And because it's a living document, it facilitates collaboration and prevents duplication of data. So it's a means of pooling existing information, developing good practices, and easily identifying emerging initiatives, which then allows us to develop a more harmonized research framework where we define our regulatory question of interest, conduct the literature surveillance, develop your qualitative AOP, use it to identify where the knowledge gaps are, and then design the experiments, possibly across biological levels of organization, leveraging collaboration to build the better projects, and then feeding the generated information into the AOP framework. And this way, as data is produced, it then supports a bigger cause. This in turn will allow communities to work together more effectively to advance practices, processes, and broadly science. So recognizing that the concept of adverse outcome pathways are not new, they've been around for a while in the form of biomarkers, bioindicators. They were originally conceptualized by the Environmental Protection Agency, predominantly to support chemical toxicity, and then later adopted by the OECD, where they officially launched a program in 2012. Then they developed guidance documents, a user handbook, and then the first 5 AOPs were endorsed in 2016. And we submitted our first radiation relevant AOP in 2018. So the OECD program consists of 5 modules. The most well-developed is the AOP Wiki. So the Wiki provides you avenues to look at evidence and descriptions of key events and key event relationships. And there's other modules which are not as well developed, but the Effectopedia is in beta testing, and this is a media for allowing you to develop quantitative AOPs. So there's about 500 AOPs currently deposited in the wiki, and there's a wealth of knowledge from both the chemical and ecological fields, all which is relevant to radiation insults. So this includes key events related to DNA damage, inflammation, oxidative stress, mitochondrial changes, your classic hallmarks of cancer, and much more. So this groundwork could easily be leveraged and expanded using data from radiation insults. And in doing this, there's a number of benefits. So you can refine risk assessment from combined exposures, such as the radiation and chemical insult. The approach can then better link biological data to human data. It can identify biomarkers of disease detection and progression, better understanding of non-cancer effects, and broadly, it can identify controversies and uncertainties in mechanisms where the knowledge gaps are that can prioritize research and a better coordination of research among scientists. As well, it also allows you to move away from looking at one stressor to population-based risk and looking at multiple stressors that can possibly support individualized risk assessment. So awareness on this approach is already underway. There's been a number of workshops, meetings held over the last couple of years where this topic has been presented. And the most recent conducted by IRSN, where there were over 200 participants that brought together both the chemical and the radiation field to have those productive conversations on where this approach could support radiation risk assessment. As well, there's also been a number of key publications that have come out, starting with Dr. Julian Preston's pioneering work, and then the recent NCRP report that has provided showing the approach to using mechanistic data to support epidemiological studies. And there's also been a number of studies conducted by my group where we've questioned, is there a role for the adverse outcome pathway to support risk assessment? How can we begin integrating the approach, and how can we bring scientific communities together? As well, we've provided a case example of radon-induced lung cancer. Additionally, there's also demonstrated uptake. So we in Canada have started a new Canadian program to understand health effects from low dose exposures, and AOPs is included as a key component to the strategic research agenda. As well, more recently, the Canadian Space Agency supported the construction of an AOP network relevant to space health outcomes, also collaboration with NASA research scientists. And as well, the Nuclear Energy's NEST initiative, which is the Nuclear Education Skill and Technology Framework, has included AOPs as a new theme for the training of our next generation experts. So the broad vision here is to define the regulatory questions of interest across various domains of research, like environmental, occupational, medical, as an example, and take the literature space within these fields, derive using in vitro animal and human studies, and organize them into key events that can form a structured AOP to help define the research questions of interest and hopefully eventually support risk assessment. So in order to do this, we really do require cooperation and coordination. We need to assemble organizations pursuing the use of AOPs, discuss and develop strategies to motivate others who aren't to begin using it, identify priority areas for AOP development, where the regulatory questions of interest are, and then also discuss the challenges and difficult questions regarding its feasibility to actually support regulatory decision-making. So in this context, through the initiative of the Nuclear Energy Agency's Committee on Radiation Protection and Public Health High-Level Group on Low Dose Research has formed an AOP topical group that's being chaired by myself and Knut Erik Tollefsen from the Norwegian Institute of Water Research, also assisted by Dr. Danielle Beaton from the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, under the leadership, of course, of Jacqueline Garnier-Laplace and the HLD LDR chair, Dominique Laurier. So the foreseen activities of this topical group is to advance radiological and chemical research using the adverse outcome pathway framework. So it will be a forum to discuss, identify, and collaboratively develop joint initiatives, facilitate collaboration and coordination between the chemical and radiation fields for effective implementation of the framework. So our mission includes demonstrating the efficiency of the approach, how it can identify knowledge gaps, where it can advance in terms of health outcomes from human and non-human species, also demonstrating the value of collaborative, expansive studies, and then eventually contributing and advancing the goals of the OECD program towards non-chemical stressors. So for us to be successful, we really do need to work in 3 pillars of work. We need to promote, engage, and develop. So in this context, we have 6 items on our work plan. The first one being the Horizon Style exercise, which you will hear a little bit more in a few minutes. We also have an intent to develop focus workshops on specific AOP challenged areas. We want to absolutely engage societies and journals, develop case examples relevant to the radiation field, and also develop genomic informed AOPs and reviews on AOPs applied to radioecological challenges. So in terms of integration, we've already started the steps. So we've leveraged the expertise from the chemical community. They've shared experiences through case examples. We've already started transferring some of the knowledge and promoting the concepts to societies and journals. And our next step is really to partner and develop proposals together. So in terms of next steps, we want to engage the radiation community to contribute to the Horizon Style exercise by asking what questions can the AOP framework support to advance radiological research and where are the challenges? As well, to identify priority areas for workshops, development strategies for outreach activities using the collected information from the survey. So in this way, together with the help of OECD, we hope that we can take existing mechanistic data and better organize it to help improve our understanding of health risks from radiation exposures. So with that, I'd like to really acknowledge the OECD, specifically the NEA, Dr. Jacqueline Garnier-Laplace, and Dr. Ted Lazo, who recently retired, as well from the OECD EGMAS committees, the secretariats, both Dr. Magdalena Sashana and Dr. Natalie Delrue, and of course our high-level low-dose rate chair, Dr. Dominique Laurier, and from the University of Ottawa, Dr. Carol Yuck, who has been a great mentor on AOPs, and our COHERE champions, Dr. Ruth Wilkins and Deborah Quayle. So if you have any questions regarding the topical group, feel free to contact myself, Dr. Knut Erik Tolofsen, or Dr. Danielle Beaton. And thank you so much for your attention.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to first thank the Radiation Research Society for having me today. And a special thank you to Dr. Applegate and Dr. Azam for moderating today's session. On behalf of myself and my project co-lead, Dr. Julie Leblanc, I'd like to provide you today with an overview of our Horizon Style exercise, a project that we're conducting with the assistance of the NEA OECD and with the guidance of Dr. Jacqueline Garnier-Laplace, Dr. Laurier, of course, Dr. Chauhan, Dr. Tolleson, and our dedicated steering committee, whom I see many of you on the participants list, so I'm glad you're here today. My presentation today will begin with a brief introduction. I'll go over the project objective and dive right into the two main aspects of the project, the key question solicitation and the follow-up international survey. I'll conclude with some highlights on how we plan to disseminate our findings, and that should leave some time for questions and discussion at the end. As mentioned by Dr. Chauhan in the previous presentation, the NEA OECD's high-level group on low-dose research is chaired by Dr. Laurier, who I understand couldn't make it to the webinar today. So if we have any challenging questions, we can just all agree right now that we will forward them to him upon his return. Under the HLG LDR umbrella, the RAD-Chem AOP Joint Topical Group is performing the Horizon Style exercise to evolve the development and the use of adverse outcome pathways, or AOPs, in radiation research and regulation. The Joint Topical Group, as mentioned, is chaired by Dr. Chauhan and Dr. Tolleson with the assistance of Dr. Beaton. The Topical Group will be a forum to discuss, identify, and collaboratively develop joint initiatives. The vision of the group is to demonstrate AOPs as an essential tool to characterize the knowledge domain, define evidence gaps, identify research and developmental needs, and ultimately inform research directions based on knowledge from both the chemical and the radiation research communities. In addition to all of the reasons I listed on the previous slide, perhaps the most compelling and important use of AOPs, particularly for me and the agency I work for, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, will be to support science-based regulatory decisions or even regulatory changes. A key example that comes to mind is the huge amount of data required to support a change in, say, a given dose limit. If you're not aware of the CNSC, we regulate the use of nuclear energy and materials. We implement Canada's international commitments on the peaceful use of nuclear energy. And directly embedded into our mandate is the requirement to disseminate objective scientific, technical, and regulatory information with the public and all of our stakeholders. With my nuclear regulator hat on, this project is important to us because we believe that AOPs will help shape the future of radiation research. I am what I call an AOP enthusiast as opposed to an AOP developer. I imagine some of you watching today are wondering how to make that leap from enthusiast to developer as well. We're hoping that this Horizon Style exercise will break down any barriers and help you make the leap. In Dr. Chauhan's presentation, she mentioned the OECD website, and I encourage you to go check out those YouTube videos and infographics. To advance the AOP framework in radiation research, we need uptake from researchers, industry, policy experts, and regulators alike. In our capacity as the national regulator, and with representation on key committees like CRPPH, UNSCEAR, and the ICRP, we've been able to encourage and promote the use of the AOP framework where applicable. So let's move on to discussing the project. As we're becoming more familiar with AOPs, moving from that molecular initiating event through the key events and ending with an adverse outcome, as so well described in the previous presentation, we're beginning to understand how this new approach can organize existing data to create a strong weight of evidence so that we can use that mechanistic data in radiation risk assessment. Not only will we be creating a strong weight of evidence, we'll finally be able to marry radiation biology and epidemiology as proposed in the NCRP report number 186, published in 2020. For reference, it was titled Approaches for Integrating Information from Radiation Biology and Epidemiology to Enhance Low-Dose Health Risk Assessment. But AOPs can go farther than RadBio and Epi. It can bring together so many different disciplines, and that's what's so special about it. So the objective of this project will be to assess the current understanding of the AOP framework in the field of radiation sciences. But we're also hoping to promote AOPs and identify the needs and priorities that will guide AOP development in radiation research and regulation. A traditional horizon scan is a method of systematically searching for and identifying emerging trends, opportunities, and limitations that might impact the future directions of a defined subject. For us, that defined subject is the use of AOP in radiation research. Generally, through this process, a group of experts conduct a horizon scan by reaching out to the global scientific community to collect questions and information, then rank the collected questions and develop appropriate FAQs. The information gathered through this process also serves to inform future workshops and guide future research. Our team will follow a similar plan by first soliciting key questions on the use of AOPs in radiation research from the global radiation research community, so yourselves, everyone here today. Second, our steering committee will select the top questions that were collected and develop a survey whereby the radiation research community will rank those top questions according to their needs and their interests. What do you all think is the most important area where AOP could help answer research questions or decrease the level of uncertainty at low doses? We're hoping to gauge the level of knowledge, interest, and even hesitation of using the AOP framework in the radiation field. The methodology we're using to do this has been used in other fields quite a bit. So for that reason, we enlisted the help of Dr. Murray Rudd to help us navigate this project. Murray has a wealth of knowledge in environmental economics and policy, as well as extensive experience conducting horizon scans, which is great because I do not. I've never done this before. Through question solicitation, we'll collect ideas and input from individuals or groups across government, academia, industry, non-governmental organizations. Additionally, by using a ranking exercise, we'll identify priority questions, as I mentioned, regarding key needs and limitations that should be considered in the advancement of the AOP framework and its regulatory applications. The approach has been successfully implemented in the chemical toxicology field, as we just heard about. So we'd like to leverage that positive experience and that expertise within our own group. For that reason, we've cross-pollinated our steering committee with experts in the chemical toxicology field. As I mentioned earlier, the key question solicitation, that collection of your ideas and questions, will lead to the development of an international survey. Our timeline for this second phase of the project is listed on the slide. The survey sample will be made up of those individuals and organizations we'd like to hear from. We'll design and test the survey prior to rolling it out in the new year. Then the data will be collected and analyzed in the winter months. Essentially, the steering committee will package the top questions from the key question solicitation into a survey. The survey respondents, or the survey sample, will have the chance to highlight which areas and which research questions are most important to you and identify the priority areas that will guide AOP development and reveal any areas primed for collaborative initiatives. That's the whole point, is collaboration. The information we obtain from this survey will guide the future program of work of the joint RAD-Chem topical group, and perhaps give us some great ideas on possible focused workshops. Next slide, please. I included this slide to wrap up everything we've been discussing today. Our hope is that after this Horizon style exercise is done, we'll convince you all that AOP framework is the wave of the future because it offers an excellent opportunity for collaborative research. We hope to identify the level of understanding and interest on using the framework, as well as identify any hesitations, the challenges or limitations you may foresee with regards to implementation. We want to hear what you think those challenges are. Our project will be a success if we can identify priority areas for AOP development, including identifying subject matter experts who are willing to learn and become part of the AOP review process. I would like you to consider this your official invitation to take part in phase 1 of this project, the key question solicitation. You can join the conversation on AOPs by visiting the website indicated on the slide. Prior to submitting your question, we would ask that you provide us with some additional information. We're interested to know how long you've worked in the field of radiation, your primary domain of work, and the sector and country in which you work. We also have a few questions about your level of familiarity with AOPs and whether you've published on radiation research in general, as well as anything relevant to the AOP framework. Lastly, we also ask, we want to know if you're a member of any societies or international groups such as CRPPH, ICRP, Health Physics, IRPA, ISO-RED, NCRP, UNSCEAR, or any others. And of course, the wonderful Radiation Research Society. If you have any questions, please consult the FAQ page found on our project website. I know this screenshot is a bit small, but it's just there to let you know that we have an FAQ and we provide some key pieces of information regarding details of the project, the team, confidentiality. It's there if you need it. On this slide, you can see what the website looks like, where you would input your AOP related question. We've indicated a few pointers for what makes a good question. Essentially, an ideal question would address important knowledge gaps. It would have a factual answer that doesn't depend on value judgments. It would cover a spatial and temporal scale that can realistically be addressed by expert groups. And it can't be answered with yes, no, or it depends. We also encourage all of you when submitting your question to include the rationale for your question. Perhaps there's a specific gap you're trying to answer or a regulatory change you are hoping to support. I know many of you are quite keen and are itching to ask. Yes, don't worry, you can submit more than one question, up to a total of 20 candidate questions. And filling in all of the information I mentioned on the previous slide, including your question, should take you about 5 minutes. And I want to stress that it's okay if more than one person submits the same question. That will tell us that maybe this is an important research question for several different groups. To give you an idea of an ideal question before we wrap up, it should be useful for decision makers because it should increase the effectiveness of policy and decision-making in the field of radiation protection. The following are some examples of well-designed questions that meet the criteria that I listed on the previous slide. In the first box, you can see the question, how can one incorporate risk factors into AOP development? And this question might mean something different to different experts. In the second box, the question reads, how can the AOP framework be used to support radiation risk assessment? Alternatively, you could ask, how can AOP be incorporated into decision-making? In the third box, you can see the question, what is the best approach for determining the most influential studies to support the weight of evidence in an AOP? And lastly, how can we improve the characterization of the exposure-response relationship, considering multiple stressors? For example, when both radiation and chemical exposures are present. This might lead you to ask, does the AOP framework allow flexibility to be stressor specific? I hope these examples have gotten your neurons firing and your creative juices flowing, because ideally we would like to collect a couple hundred questions in this phase of the project. Today, presenting to you is our first big push to encourage you all to submit your AOP related questions to us. I've shown you a clip of our FAQ a few slides ago. Our team plans to publish 2 papers for this project, one on the process of the Horizon style exercise and another on the results. I hope many of you plan on attending the ICRP symposium in Vancouver in 2022, delayed 1 year due to COVID. We will be submitting an abstract and hope to present our results there. And I promise you, Vancouver is not nearly as cold as the rest of Canada in the month of November. I can't guarantee there's no snow. Not selling it. As I've mentioned, our website is officially open and we encourage you to submit your questions today, right now even. Leave this webinar and go now that you've heard how exciting this project is. Given how small the radiation research community is, we suspect many of you will politely be nagged into submitting questions, possibly more than once by our wonderful steering committee. If you could also reach out to your professional networks and encourage colleagues to submit their questions to us, that would be greatly appreciated by the project team. We would like to collect questions from all over the globe to capture as many different perspectives as possible. If you have any questions or you'd like some additional information, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I've indicated my email on the slide. And before I conclude, I'd like to thank the NEA OECD for their continued guidance, the members of our steering committee, and my last thank you goes out to my director, Kaisa, who does not just let me work on these neat projects, but encourages me to do so. That concludes my presentation, and Vanita and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much for your attention today.
What is the frequency of information gathering for the horizon scanning? I'm not sure you alluded to it, and how many global entities are included? So I know you're trying to make it global. And then the other point that was made is outside of surveys, what other endpoints, deliverables are intended? And obviously, I think you do want policy change and what kind of reports and identification of gaps and challenges. I think that could go on for a whole nother lecture, but.
Okay, I will start with the frequency of info gathering. That's a really good point that I might have missed to emphasize. This collection of questions is going to be open all summer, so all through July and August. And then in September, we will gauge if we've received enough questions or not, if there needs to be another push or an extension to the deadline. But we would really like to wrap up our key question solicitation by the end of August. That's the first point. Right now, we're focused on this key question solicitation to find out what the feeling is. Are you interested in learning more? Are you open to learning more? Are you able to learning more? Will you become an AOP developer? And what do you need to do that? So the survey is the first step, but I mentioned in the presentation that workshops and other activities can be planned through this joint topical group to facilitate that development and that growth. I'm not sure, Vanita, if you wanted to add anything.
No, Julie, I think you covered it all. So the intent is global and to get the information out as much as possible to everywhere, all the major research institutes. So.
Right, so if people have ideas, I think please, I think you guys are both open to contacts and other ideas. Thank you for that.
Definitely.
Edouard?
And the question is, I am curious as to how AOPs can assist in quantitative estimation of radiation risk and reduce uncertainty and thereby assist in setting those limits.
So I can start this question. I mean, this is an excellent question. We've had this question come up a lot, and this is going to be an important discussion point for when we have our workshops. But just to highlight, like the AOP is a resource. It's a means to organize existing data on biological events using dose response, timed response data. So these relationships from one key event to another can be developed into a quantitative AOP. So the way I see it is AOPs allow you to identify where the knowledge gaps are so that you can go to that second level and do your priority experiments. They can't be a standalone tool. They have to be supplemented with other types of models, like biologically based models. So if you develop your qualitative AOP, identify where the knowledge gaps are, conduct your priority research in those areas, then hopefully you'll get a better understanding of what you need to know. The other thing to highlight is that because AOPs are anchored to the adverse outcome, you're no longer looking at the stressor, then it's more about disease progression rather than when events are initiated. So I think all those processes sort of help highlight where there's early events and where they lead to adverse outcomes.
Thanks, Vanita. That was great. That the last bit of Dr. Little's question is now taking all of that and moving it to a regulatory decision. Think about all of the data and all of the studies. Were they all with the same weight of evidence? Were they all powerful, strong? Were the statistics the same for the change for the lens of the eye? What studies were informing and driving that decision to lower the dose? So that's the type of information that when you have a big departure in the regulatory world, you want to be able to have the data to back up that decision. So that's what we're hoping to do is organize the data so that when we do make any different regulatory decisions, and this isn't just in Canada or the US, this is globally, how can we do so with confidence based on the data?
And what is the method that the steering committee plans to use to decide what are the most important questions collected through this Horizon exercise? And I think, you presented that we have a template from a different domain in ecological research. So we have a way, and we have our facilitators who are going to help us with this exercise. So that's very useful. And then we have experts in different areas of radiation sciences. But maybe you can elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, the methodology is the reason why we enlisted the help of Dr. Murray Rudd, who's done this sort of thing before. So he has a methodology that he's going to teach our steering committee how to use. We're going to do that through review of all of the questions. We're going to get together in a workshop, probably several hours over several days, and do a best worst type of ranking. But that's something that many of us have never done before. So that's going to require learning how to do it and how to apply the methodology and be consistent with others who have completed this Horizon style exercise. So it's not something that I am fluent in, but the steering committee is willing to learn how to properly assess a question. We have our criteria. So he's given us guidance on what makes a good question. We have to make sure it's not a yes, no, that of course, time and spatial relationships need to be really considered. Is this a question that can be answered realistically through a research project and within a few years sort of thing? So there's our criteria that we're going to follow, there's our methodology, and of course our guiding expert, Dr. Rudd, will get us through that.
Thank you, Judy. And we have a question from New Delhi, actually from Muhammad. And the question is, have you any data about radiation responsive proteins?
So that's a very specific question. I guess what Dr. Hussain is implying is data related to radiation-induced protein responses being able to be incorporated into AOPs? And absolutely, there is within the wiki a whole key event that's specific to protein modifications. So I can direct him to there. There isn't currently any data that's related to radiation responsive proteins, but that could be something that we could consider adding in. And in fact, we're working on a space-related AOP where protein modifications is an important key event in there. So we are compiling data associated with that. Still work in progress.
But that sounds like an excellent question to submit to our website.
Is there any criteria for including international organizations in your Horizon AOP initiative? By default, all the ICRP member organizations can participate.
There's no limitation on who can participate in this first phase of the project. We would like everyone who is interested in learning more on AOPs to submit their questions to frame our international survey. With regards to our steering committee, that was done through the NEA OECD. We put out a call and collected what we were hoping was a diverse group, because we don't just need radiation biologists, we need people with medical backgrounds, epidemiologists, biodosimetry, policy, economics, chemical toxicology. So we tried to have a very well-rounded steering committee to bring as many different perspectives to the table as possible. And that question on our website was mostly to try to see who are we reaching and who are we not reaching, because we can do a secondary push of like, oh, no one from the NCRP was engaged, we should reach out to them specifically. So it's just as important to identify who we're getting and who we are not getting to with this, because we want our global perspectives.
How many questions have to be included in the final survey? And a follow-up, how will the final survey be analyzed?
So, Vineeta, if you don't mind, I'll keep going. In the final survey, so after we have done this key question solicitation, I don't know about you, but webinars are amazing. Thank you so much for coming. But webinars and surveys have been predominant in COVID, and people are getting survey fatigue. So we don't want to overwhelm you with a survey that's going to take you all day to answer. We will limit it to, I don't know, somewhere between 20 and 40 questions for you to rank those 20 or 40 and tell us why those are your important research questions. And then the second part of Danielle's question was,
how will the final survey be analyzed?
yeah, so a little bit different in the radiation biology, radiation research world. Survey validity is really important. So we have to track how many people are going to answer to report on our survey responses, because you only are as good as how many responses you get. So if you have few, that's not going to be considered a valid survey. So we will make sure that we reach as many people as possible, we get as many responses as possible, and that's going to be hopefully bucketed in different categories. So we'll try to compare who's interested in the same topic. So that's Dr. Rudd's expertise, not my own. So he will be responsible for analyzing those survey results and then providing us a report with how he's broken it down.
One question, if I may, from myself, that certainly the Horizon Style survey is going to generate a platform for the need of research to inform on low dose health effects. So I presume you mentioned that there will be a publication in which the steering committee is involved, but do you contemplate also to invite experts from all around the world? Because this will be an important paper that will involve, research globally to give this direction.
Yeah, the steering committee will be responsible for those publications. And like I mentioned, we really do want around the world participation, global participation in responding, not just key question solicitation, but responding to the survey. So that'll be how we engage internationally.
Geographic participation is very important too.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
I also had a question for, I guess I'll say Vinita. Could you give us an example of a published or completed chemical or ecologic AOP that changed policy?
That's an excellent question, Kimberly. So there aren't a lot of examples, right? In the chemical field, there's a total of 5 endorsed AOP, and most of them are related to genotoxic effects. But recently there's been one to skin sensitization. So this AOP has a number of endpoints that are now being used as markers for skin sensitization and for chemical testing that has sort of helped regulatory decision making. And it's also hard to monitor. When an AOP is deposited, it's hard to monitor whether it is supporting any policy changes. So that's something they're looking into, is sort of following AOPs to seeing how they're being used by regulatory decision makers.
So it didn't, for example, have anything to do with the Johnson & Johnson announcement today that they were recalling some of their...
How, there will be a specific effort to tease out the effect of other co-stressors than exposure to radiation in the data that will be inputted into the AOP to look at the key events that lead to the adverse outcome pathway, right? I mean, exposure to other stressors in addition to exposure to irradiation exposure. And how are you going to vet that?
Yeah, so the intent here is not to vet it, right? You want to look at it as an all hazards approach and look at what's common and what's delineated and look at the pathways in the context of the adverse outcome. So we're not worried about the stressor because it's hard to tease those effects out, right?
Yeah.
You know that.
So there will be building a database somewhere with all the data, like an effort to having a a
Yes.
global database?
Yeah, so the intent here is, I think one of the modules of the AOP knowledge base is the Effectopedia, where the intent is to bring all the knowledge in the empirical evidence together and build those dose response relationships and identify, are there thresholds at which certain events start to become activated? Is this consistent across certain stressors, or are there differences? So absolutely, that's the intent. I mean, the long-term vision is to develop the quantitative AOPs.
Well,
Thank
that's
you.
an example that I could think of that might be, one that, we don't know what to do with, where we can't link the radiobiology with medicine, with radiology. And that, we're getting these reports now in our literature that show that a chest CT scan can show DNA damage and chromosomal aberrations, but we have no idea if that means anything. So you may have seen those reports last year that have started cropping up, but we don't really know if that means anything, if that means increased risk of cancer. So that's an example of where AOPs might be really useful.
Right, and that's a perfect Horizon style exercise question that you need to submit, right? And we need to have focused working groups on sort of these different domain areas. So environmental, medical, occupational, get the research questions that are of interest, and then decide how we're going to use the framework to support them.
So thank you and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.